The more you study and learn about history, the more you learn that we have been lied to about everything and by everyone. You've been lied to by our government. We've been lied to by our churches. We've been lied to by our teachers. And we have been lied to by our parents. Even if they did not intend to lie to us, they simply told us things that were not true and propagated the lies. So either by complicity or by ignorance, at the end of the day, the results are still the same. And this has fueled an anger, as we have learned that we have been lied to, not just for years or decades or even centuries, but we have been lied to for millenniums. People today are not just angry about the failures of this system that we are struggling under, they are angry about being manipulated by the powers that be throughout humanity's history. And do you know what? They know it. And that's why there is such a hardline push to stop education. And when I say stop education, I mean stop the expansion of knowledge. Stop history from being taught to include both sides of the story. And this directly ties into the push to stop unfiltered social media communications and education, particularly international and especially as it applies to this TikTok app. If the free people of the world are not stopped, we might start learning from each other. We can get our own information now. We're not limited to the approved television propaganda. If we start learning from one another, we might start to understand one another. We might start to learn more about the lies that we have been told year after year, decade after decade, century after century, generation after generation. We might stop obeying their orders, being their obedient servants. We might stop obeying their orders and dying in their useless wars. We might learn such things as it was Muslims who defeated the Roman Empire and not those northern pagan tribes that we've so often been told, or how it was Muslims coming to Europe that brought women's rights to Europe. They don't want you to know that the Crusaders were bloodthirsty savages that slaughtered innocents by the millions, people who had never raised a sword to them. Men, women, and children all slaughtered, and in some cases even cannibalized. That's right, the Crusaders practiced cannibalism on multiple occasions. Our Western mind can easily conjure up an image of a King Arthur riding bravely by the cross, even though he's a fictional character. Yet our minds probably cannot so readily conjure up the image of a Crusader knight slow roasting a baby over a fire, even though that was real and actually happened. So indoctrinated is our Western society that we can more readily accept fiction than unpleasant fact. We might learn how, when Muslims captured large portions of Europe, unlike the Christians, they never practiced conversion by the sword in Europe. Join our religion or die. In fact, when the Muslims conquered European territory, they guaranteed freedom of religion for all. And that is why, when the Muslim Empire was eventually defeated in Europe, those European territories remained dominantly Christian. They were never forced into conversion. They don't want you to know how it was Persians who first banned slavery and guaranteed freedom of religion, or how it was Persians that rebuilt the Temple of Solomon with the assistance of Egyptian engineers. They don't want you to know that it was in fact Persians who were the original founders of Greek philosophy. They don't want you to know that the Alamo was in fact a war over slavery. Yeah, all those Texans, they were happily Mexican until Mexico decided to ban slavery. And suddenly those Texans wanted to join the U.S. so they wouldn't have to lose their slaves. Sure puts a different light on all those great heroes defending the Alamo when you realize they were fighting to keep slavery alive in Texas. They don't want you to know how George MacArthur, Dwight D. Eisenhower, and George Patton slaughtered World War I veterans on U.S. soil. They don't want you to know how American Armed Forces turned its guns on unarmed American veterans and their families. They don't want you to know how the U.S. Marine Corps operated slave labor camps in Haiti up into the 1930s. They don't want you to know that Japan had offered to surrender prior to the U.S. dropping nuclear weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So why did they do this? It's all about control and ideology through the false teachings of superiority. They need you to believe that white European Christendom was so superior that even when evil was done under its banner, it was still somehow all for a greater good. Even atrocities such as the Crusaders, or the genocide of the American native peoples, or the enslavement of black Africans, they were still somehow excusable because it served a greater purpose. No matter how terrifying the event, it was still all somehow the will of God. They don't want you to understand history for the betterment of yourself or the expansion of knowledge or the betterment of humanity. They want you to worship their icons and thus be obedient to your masters, the masters of the church and your masters of the state. Obedient to their ideology, obedient to their system, obedient to their economic slavery. The expansion of knowledge threatens their power. They know that in the long term, when enough people have the knowledge, their power will cease to exist. Their control will cease to exist. Their fortunes will cease to exist. That proverbial forbidden fruit that Adam and Eve were to have eaten of, spoken about in the Bible. What was that fruit? It was the tree of knowledge, the knowledge of good and evil. The establishment holds itself as infallible as God, and their actions, no matter how insidious, are still somehow righteous. And like that biblical story of old, they do not want you to be eating of that fruit of knowledge. These people are many things, but they are not stupid. They have successfully manipulated humanity for thousands of years. They know exactly what they are doing. And they will tell you that it's all for a greater good. That you're not capable of self-determination. You're not capable of ruling over yourself. But their actions are rooted in greed and lust and power. The exact same things that they preach against are their motivating factors. These people preach God, but there is no goodness in them.